Good evening and welcome to this event put on by Christ Church Riverside. Thank you very much for taking some time out of your Friday evening to engage with topics that are very, very important. And thank you also to the technological people in Christ Church Riverside who work hard to allow events like this to happen. I really do appreciate it. My name is Peter Burney. I am the pastor of Christ Church Riverside. I'm not from Hull, it won't surprise you to hear, but I've been the pastor of Riverside for 4 years, or this is my 4th year now. I was a teacher before then. I came to Hull to learn to be a maths teacher and did 12 years of that, but I'm loving being the minister of Christ Church Riverside. Now, over the last 4 weeks, members of Christ Church Riverside have been sending out videos, posting videos to some of their friends and family. We're putting this event on tonight. And then over the next 4 Sunday mornings, we're having some Advent services, which are going to be really easy to engage with and access for people who maybe have never even been to church before. And the reason we are doing these things is because we want the people around us, but especially, more pressingly, we want the people that we love to come and follow Jesus. But is that an arrogant thing to want? Is it arrogance to ask people to follow Jesus? Well, for many of us here this evening, that question's a very important one. Now, that's either because you are a Christian and you might have spent some of the last 4 weeks sending videos to your friends or family, hoping that they will come and follow Jesus. Or else it's because, well, you aren't a Christian, but someone you really like has been bugging you with this stuff. And even though they might not seem like an arrogant person, it still feels a bit intrusive for them to want you to change what you live for. Well, I'm in the first category there, and I've been bugging some of my friends with this stuff. And it does feel weighty to try to convince people to believe something different to what they already believe. But is it arrogance to do that? Well, add to that the place where our society and culture are right now when it comes to leaders. We don't easily follow anyone, partly because many of us feel very consistently let down by people in important positions. If you go back even 50 years, it would have been inconceivable to have a prime minister who had already been filmed swinging through the air on a harness or knocking some 10-year-old over playing rugby. And wherever you are on the political spectrum, right or left, the contrast between the grace and statesmanship and kind of majesty of some previous American presidents, and then a glance at some of President Trump's tweets, it's very stark. Here's one that really stuck out for me recently. Truly weird. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky reminds me of a spoiled brat without a properly functioning brain. He was terrible at debate. Now, that makes us chuckle. Tweets like that make us chuckle. But at the same time, there is this stark contrast, or there is this difficulty we have with just leadership in general these days. Many leaders in our past have proved corrupt. Many others have proved pretty inept at their job. And so we are resistant to following anyone. So tonight I'm hoping to do 2 simple things. Firstly, with the help of some interviews with normal Christians in Christ Church Riverside, I want to emphasize that the difficulties we face in life should make us all want to ask someone for help. Rather than arrogance, it's actually humility to recognize our need and then to look outside of ourselves for something or someone to meet that need. And if you agree with that, well, then it will help you to see that your friend who wants you to follow Jesus isn't being arrogant, but is at worst mistaken. But secondly, then, using Jesus' own words about himself, I hope that you will see that he is utterly unique and in an utterly unique position to meet our needs. And therefore, when someone invites you to follow Jesus, they are doing it as a fellow struggler in this world. They're doing it as a thirsty wanderer in the desert who has found an oasis and wants you to come and drink and live as well. Every week in Christ Church Riverside, in our services on a Sunday morning, we try to make clear through our words and our actions, and even the way we structure the services, that church is not a place for people who think they are good to come and impress a God. But rather, church is made up of people who know they are broken, but trust that Jesus is the answer that he claimed to be. So let me get stuck into this then with something Jesus said about himself that matters so much when we experience difficulties in life. Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever." Now that's quite a claim, isn't it? Jesus says that he himself is what people need for life now and for life forever. Now, for some people, that's a pretty easy claim to ignore because, well, life's more or less easy for them. They've never really hungered or thirsted for anything better. But for most of us, and I guess especially so at the moment where we find ourselves in as a country and even as a city, a claim like that should at least spark our interest. You know, for the vast majority of the world, life has thrown up many reasons why we might hunger for better or be thirsty for relief. I spoke to Chris, one of the blokes in our church family, about some of the difficulties he has been dealing with recently. Chris, thanks very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. You've become a Christian about nearly 3 years ago at Christmas time, but recently you've experienced quite a lot of the brokenness of life. Can you tell us a wee bit about that?
Yeah, I've been suffering with anxiety, which kind of was probably bubbling under the surface maybe earlier than it kind of I acknowledged it in a sense. I've always been kind of a conscious person, but I think late summer it kind of rose to the surface, and it was a really horrible feeling. The heavy anxiety, the physical side of it, the arms tingling, your legs tingling, heart racing, feel clammy, over things that I would never have felt like that before. And the kind of the thinking side of it as well, second guessing everything. And it was quite upsetting at times because thinking to myself at the time, I'm like, what's happening to me? And am I going to feel normal again? And this is not normal, but make the decisions I would have normally made. And that's one of the things you've shared, is that just overthinking everything. And you're a kind of jovial guy. You love being with people, and so it's had a big impact on lots of things like that, hasn't it? Just being overcautious with things. I know. It's just second guessing everything. Just that thing, did that come across right? Did I upset that person? I don't know, I'll check with them, and just overthinking everything basically.
I think this is what anxiety does to people, and many people are struggling with it actually, Chris. So it's really great that you're willing to say these things on camera. Now, how come then, if life is so hard, how come you haven't given up really and following Jesus then?
Because I think as a Christian, I believe before I became a Christian, that, God had a plan for me from being born. And I think he's provided things I've needed to start to get on top of this. I think from being born, he's provided me with amazing lifelong friends, family, and more recently, he's introduced me to an amazing church family as well. So I think that's from being born. I think I feel very blessed in everything, friends, family, work. My work's been really helpful through this. So I think that the plan is the plan, and hopefully, if the plan is I can maybe help someone one day that's suffering with this, if I can help them understand them in some way, maybe that's the plan. So it's got to trust and keep trusting. Well,
I said many times I'm really encouraged by how you've been dealing with this very hard time, but I am really, really grateful, because even filming this isn't easy for you, so I'm really grateful that you've done it. I think it'll be helpful for many people, and it's definitely helped me as I've put this talk this evening together as well. So I really appreciate it, Chris. Thanks very much. You see, mental health and anxiety, they're just one of the things that so many around us are struggling with on top of the pandemic. Now, you can add to that many things, financial pressures and relationship breakdowns, work stress, illness, injustice. There's a whole load of things that you could put in there as well. And when we're being honest, not only do we hunger for a solution to these things, but we also kind of feel aggrieved that we're having to go through them at all. Now, if you want some light relief this weekend, if you want to have a good laugh, just type into YouTube, "Robber gets trapped by doors." And it's really lovely, heartwarming to watch people getting what they deserve, as these guys try to steal from shops and service stations, and they just bumble about and they get caught by the police. And there's something good about seeing people get what they seem to deserve. Now, take that up a notch. And when someone like Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, when he gets COVID-19 and dies, like what happened recently, well, we can deal with that okay, can't we? But when someone we love is in the middle of a dark valley, well, it's a whole lot more difficult to shrug our shoulders and carry on. You see, we want there to be a satisfactory answer. And so the spotlight goes on Jesus, and there's a drum roll, and he says that if you're hungry, or if you're thirsty, or if you're struggling to really live, well, he can deal with that. He is the answer to our brokenness and in our brokenness. Well, if you are already thinking that Jesus is promising too much, well, then his next claim will really bother you, because he goes on to say this: "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die." There is no trial more difficult to deal with than death. Billy Graham, he was one of the most famous Christians of the late 20th century, and he said this: "When death separates us from someone we love, there is a time when we think no one has suffered as we have." C.S. Lewis, the loved author, he would agree. He said, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. I dread the moments when the house is empty." A few weeks ago, somebody responded to our video about death, and they wrote on YouTube that, well, actually, they were pretty relaxed about it. But I can't help but think that if someone they loved was dying, they wouldn't have that same attitude. One lady in our church has experienced much death in her life, but I couldn't video her as she is isolating with COVID at the minute. So instead, I asked her on the phone how she copes with losing 2 daughters. And her answer is simple and emphatic: God is faithful, and Jesus Christ has never let her down. Now, Margaret doesn't hide from the grief that death has brought to her, but she is filled with the hope that just will not be shaken. Well, I also spoke to Sheila about the pain of losing her husband of 62 years, and well, we can watch her response, so let's do that now. Well, Sheila, thank you very much for doing this for us. You were married to Des for a long time. Could you tell us a little bit about him?
Yes, we were married for a very long time, but it really upset me towards the end when he was suffering with dementia and other illnesses, and it saddened me. Towards the end, I know this may sound strange, but it was a relief when he died. At least I know now he's got no more suffering and is at peace.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, both Des and you are Christians. You know, you follow Jesus. Now, could you tell me a little bit about why death hasn't put you off from following Jesus since Des?
Because I know Des has gone to a better place. It's at peace and he's not suffering anymore.
Yeah.
And is with our Saviour.
Yeah.
And that's the main thing.
That's great. And that's your hope as well, isn't it, Sheila?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And you're a real encouragement to our church family because that's real in your life.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And my faith kept me strong through this in the church family. Everybody saw me through. That's great. Well, Sheila, thank you very much. I know these sort of things make you nervous, but that was really great, and thank you for doing this for us. Thanks a lot. It's good, all these brave people being videoed for this. I really do appreciate it. But just reflecting on that, there's a man called Sam Harris. Now, you probably have heard of him, but he's a prominent and he's a thoughtful atheist. He's an intelligent guy. But when he's talking about mortality, he admits that he has no idea what happens to people when they die. Maybe there's a dial tone, he says. Probably there is nothing. But the truth is, one of the clearest thinking and most respected and most outspoken atheists in the world just doesn't know. Jesus, on the other hand, does know. You see, when he said he was the resurrection and the life, he wasn't in the middle of a great speech to impress people. And he wasn't pondering philosophy in a vacuum. No, what he was doing at the time was speaking to Martha, a grief-filled friend whose brother Lazarus, another close friend of Jesus, had just died, whose body was cold in the tomb. Now, what would most of us have said to Martha? Well, certainly not, I am the resurrection and the life. But Jesus can say it, and it brought great hope because it was true. Jesus is the answer to death. Well, these two statements so far, Jesus is the answer to our brokenness, and Jesus is the answer to death. They bring us to the very center of the Christian message. They force us to ask at least three questions, okay? A why question, a how question, and a what question. Why is he the answer? Well, this is where it gets personally challenging for us. This is where the Christian message becomes quite offensive to people. So there's your warning before I get into it. Jesus is the answer because all the darkness that we experience in this world is caused by sin, by humanity's rejection of God as king. Now, it isn't a simple cause and effect relationship. It's not karma, you know, good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. I mean, I was talking to Chris and I was talking to Sheila in those videos so far, and they're both people doing things right who have had to deal with brokenness. But you see, sin is at the root of all that is wrong with this world. Melvin Tinker, he's an author of many books, but he was my vicar and many of our vicar for many years. He wrote this when he was dealing with death in a paper. He wrote this: "We die because we are sinners, attracting God's judgment for our transgressions. Death is therefore God's personal response to my personal rebellion." Now, we don't like to hear things like that said out loud. But actually, it is such a good thing to be able to discover the cause of a problem, because then there's great hope of finding a solution. We don't think doctors are bad guys when they tell us something terrible has gone wrong. Now, I don't know about you, but there are times at the moment when I cannot stomach watching the news. And my wife rolls her eyes often as I turn it over to something inane instead. But there are just so many things in this world that are so wrong and that just aren't being put right. And it doesn't seem to be a way of putting them right either. 2020, it's been full of awful examples of this. But for me, one of the most haunting things I read this year was the murder of a 7-year-old girl as she played on her scooter near her parents in a park. The murderer was a complete stranger who picked the girl at random and showed no remorse afterwards. Now, I'm sorry for even sharing that really with you and giving you that extra weight. We don't really need it at the moment. But you see, what are we supposed to do with stuff like that? What are we supposed to do with it? You see, if there's no real cause for it, well, then there's no real solution to it either. But Jesus says that
sin is the cause for all this darkness, and that he is the solution. Listen to this amazing claim. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Why is Jesus the answer? Well, because he brings light into our darkness. And this is a light that offers hope both to people who have suffered terribly because of the sins of others, but also to people who, by their sins, have caused terrible suffering to others. It's an extraordinary light. It's an extraordinary hope that can be offered. That's the why, but how can Jesus be the answer? Well, I interviewed Walter, and what he said was very helpful here. So, hi Walter, thank you for agreeing to do this for us. So it's an Irish interviewer, a Honduran interviewee whose first language is Spanish, so good luck to our English audience in understanding us. But anyway, Walter, you haven't always been a Christian, so tell us how you came to follow Jesus.
Yes, well, basically I'm from the north of the country, in Honduras. We moved to the south 20 years ago with my family, and I started to go to this small church in my town called Great Commission Church. And after a few months, almost a year to being in that church, one night the pastor was preaching the gospel, and that night he asked what would happen with me if I would die at this minute. And that question was in my head, and he shared the gospel, and I went back home. And that night I prayed to the Lord. I say, I understand, like that you died for me in the cross, and you forgive my sins, and I want to be your son. And that night I accept Jesus Christ in my heart. And after that I start to, like work and try to be, as maybe as Christian wants me to be.
Yeah. No, that's really good.
Life.
That's really helpful. That brings us on to our next question, which is probably a harder question. But before a person becomes a Christian, they just live their own way. But even when people become Christians, they still do wrong things. So how do you deal with feeling guilty and so on about doing wrong things?
Yes, I think that it would be a mistake if we think that we're not gonna do mistakes anymore, because we are sinners. That's our nature. But the first thing that comes to my head is the imagine of Jesus in that cross.
Yeah.
And thinking that I should be in there for my sin, but he decided to don't do it in that way. He just went to the cross and he died for me and for we all, and he already forgave my sins. So there's no reason why I have to be still leading with the guilty my sins, because he already forgave that. So I just have to praise him.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Walter. I know there's loads more stuff that we could all say about Christianity, but I think that's really, really great. And thank you for doing this for us. Thanks, Walter. Brilliant. You probably understood him better than you understood me anyway. But what Walter said is very helpful, because it is impossible to do a truly Christian talk without coming to the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. And the cross is the how of Christianity. When Jesus identifies himself as the light of the world, look, that can bring great hope to people who are angered and frustrated and grieved by so much wrong and injustice. One day, everything's going to be brought into the light. Absolutely everything. It's going to be a day of judgment, and it's going to be dealt with by the judge who doesn't miss anything and who doesn't get things wrong. But as well as that bringing hope to some, this also brings a real problem to everyone. And the issue is that we have so much of our own darkness. Now, people might not know about it. You might keep it well hidden. But we have so much of our own darkness that needs to be dealt with. Scott Mackay, who is going to be answering some questions later on, he gave an illustration in a sermon some point in the last couple of years that stuck in my head. And I think it's very helpful. When you think about Jesus being the light, Scott talked about a helicopter searchlight and a person's response to it. When that searchlight suddenly fixes on someone, Well, they're either relieved and delighted because they're going to be rescued, or else they're filled with dread and they try to run because they're going to be punished. It depends which program you're watching on TV. Is it 999 Ambulance, or is it Humberside Cops, or whatever? But it's either, delight at being rescued or fear of being punished. And without the cross of Jesus Christ, we would all be in that second category. But because of the cross, because Jesus accepted our punishment, because God's anger against sin could be poured out there, then people don't need to keep fearing the light. In fact, they're instead invited by Jesus to step into the light and be rescued forever. Now, this is not some sort of skewed interpretation of the crucifixion of Jesus. Rather, this is Jesus' own understanding of his mission and purpose. He described himself as a loving shepherd who was going to have to undergo a lot of pain for his sheep. He said this, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep." See, Walter's answer from earlier was exactly right. How do we deal with the guilt of sin? We look to Jesus, the light, who offers us full forgiveness and a new life walking in that light. So where have we got to in this presentation then? Well, in the face of the brokenness of this world, we need help. And Jesus says he's the answer to brokenness. In the face of our greatest trial, death, we need help. Jesus says he's the answer to death. And he is the answer because of the why and the how of Christianity. Sin causes our problems and means we too are guilty. And the cross of Jesus Christ is the solution to that sin. But this brings us to the what question. What evidence is there to back up the extraordinary things Jesus claimed? What evidence points to Jesus' words carrying authority rather than simply being arrogance? Well, Jesus' words were never hollow. When he claimed to be the bread of life, he just fed 5,000 men and loads more women and children with one packed lunch. Where he announced himself as the light of the world, he then healed a man who was born blind. And after telling Martha that he was the resurrection and the life, he called Lazarus out of death and out of the tomb, and Lazarus was raised to life. All of these things witnessed by a whole load of people who would have still been about when this account was made public. See, Jesus leaves no room for comparison with anyone else in the world, even any other religious leaders in this world. Where anyone else points away from themselves to like a higher being or a higher power or a higher consciousness or whatever, Jesus pointed again and again to himself as the answer. Listen to two more I ams that Jesus declared. He said this, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." Now, this is either authority or arrogance, and should lead us either to rejecting Jesus or worshipping him, a choice that you're going to make tonight when you switch this off, which way you're going to go. But in making that choice, remember that the one who spoke these words is the one who was put to death on a cross, buried in a tomb, and yet rose again for hundreds of people to see, a resurrection that transformed his followers and that completely changed the world that we now live in. Jesus is utterly unique, and he continues to transform people's lives today. I spoke with Brad from church about what this has done to his life. Hi Brad, thanks for doing this for us. Can you tell us a bit about how and why you became a Christian?
So my first experience of church was primary school, and we used to have to go to the local church every half term, and I absolutely hated it. I used to have to sit there on a cold stone floor and listen to some strange person in strange clothes read a difficult book. I couldn't wait to escape. And it wasn't until I met a friend whilst in the football that seemed normal. I could have a laugh with him. He played football. So I was a bit more open to listening to him. So through him and other people, I got to realise that church is actually just a place where normal people doing normal jobs and normal things meet to acknowledge that we're not just meaningless pieces of flesh, that we're actually created by a loving God.
That's great. Can you tell us a bit then about what it looks like for a young or youngish, maybe I'm doing you a favour there, but a young bloke with plenty of opportunities in life? What does that look like following Jesus?
So I became a Christian 3.5 years ago, and before that I just used to look at Christianity as being loads of rules and regulations. But it's nothing like that. Living for God means that I'm trying to make him proud, not because of he'll love me regardless of what I achieve or don't achieve, just like any father would with their son and daughter. So living for God means that I have the person who created me by my side to guide me through life, and it's a difficult life. Life is tough. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Brad. That's absolutely brilliant. Thanks for doing this.
No problem.
See, Brad's response there is the right response to Jesus, to the God who took on human flesh. He said he wants to live his life to please God. Actually, his exact language was he wants to make him proud. Well, this is worship language. And it is appropriate language to use when you are dealing with the God who loves his people to such an amazing degree. You see, it isn't arrogant to ask needy people to follow Jesus. No, instead, it is the only appropriate response. Well, thank you for listening so far. And what we're going to do now is we're going to welcome Scott Mackay, or to give him his full title, Reverend Scott Mackay, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell us a bit about his story. And then after that, I'm going to ask him a few questions. And those questions will either be ones that you send in on YouTube or Facebook or on Zoom chat or whatever, or they'll be my questions that I would like him to answer. So if you're fed up with me, then you have to get writing. Scott, thanks very much for being here tonight. You're a busy man. You're muted at the minute as well, so you have to unmute. Yeah, yes, there he is. Thanks for joining us tonight, Scott. You've had lots on recently. You're dealing with a lot, but it's brilliant to have you. So tell us a bit about yourself, and then would you tell us about how you became a Christian and what that's looked like up to your life at the minute? Thank you.
Great, thanks, Pete. Well, thank you for the invite to come. It's great to be here. This is the first time I've done a Zoom in my room since my son Benjamin installed a drum kit. And now every time I speak, I just hear the snare drum at the side. I'm married to Laura, got 3 children, Benjamin, Ruth, and Samuel, who are 13, 11, and 9. It's a good time of year to remember what ages they are, 2 years apart. And I've been in Hull 12 years now. This is my 13th year. Working for Christ Church Newland now. How did I become a Christian? It's really, when anybody asks me that question, it seems to be years apart that I get asked that question, and I have to try and remember back. Basically, for me, my mum, who was a God-fearer, it was part of that period in life where people used to pack their children off to Sunday schools, which my mum did. There's no church in the local village I lived in. But there was a little Sunday school, and I went along there and heard the stories about Jesus. Now, I was described by one of my teachers as a lovable rug. They were definitely convinced about the rug bit. I don't know if they just put the lovable on to make my parents pleased. But I was aware that I wasn't, even as a young kid, that I could be quite nasty and vindictive and get into a lot of trouble, and I guess I did feel convicted about that even as a young person. Some of the horrible things I used to do to my sisters. They were quite horrible. And so I used to go along and hear, and I guess two things really struck me even as a young kid. That was forgiveness, and that's forgiveness for bad people, because I did see myself as a bad person. But also, I guess, I don't know, maybe just because of the way that I am, the whole idea of punishment and rewards was a big thing for me, the whole carrot and a stick. And when I heard about heaven and hell, and when I was reading those things in the Bible, they really did stick with me. And I became very convinced that I didn't want to go to hell, and I did want to go to heaven. I believe them to be real places. And when I heard that there was a way to move from one to the other through Jesus, and then I started exploring that. I remember from a young age, trusting in a very simple way in Jesus for forgiveness, for eternal life. And then I say, when some people become a Christian, it's like one of those switches, light switches. You put it on and immediately the light comes on. Other people are a bit more like those sort of bulbs that take a while to warm up and then get brighter and brighter, one of those dimmer switches. And I was a bit more like the dimmer switch, and it took a period of time for me to become a Christian.
That's good. And so, have I just lost Scott? Hopefully not.
I'm still here.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry, that's my pictures. Well, thank you. So it took you a while to become a Christian, but you've been a minister for a long time now. So I guess how, like, it's shaped your life, hasn't it? It's pointed the whole direction of your life. I mean, what Brad said at the end, you want to please him. Has that been a smooth ride? Was it obvious to you that you were going to end up being a minister?
No, I just realized this year that I had my 44th birthday, and I realized that I first started working for a church full time. I started in September. I was 21, and I became 22 in October. So I realized I've had half of my life in full time, in working for a church, serving in that way, and half of my life doing other things. So I was a bit directionless. I think didn't really know what I wanted to do. Did some stuff at college. Didn't really fall in love with anything I was doing there. Then one day when I was at church and I helped out with the youth work and things, and a missionary came along and said that he liked people. He had people to go out to Italy with them, and I just thought, well, I'm not doing anything else, so I said I'll come out. And he said, oh, where are your parents? I said, oh, they don't come to church, but they'll be just glad to get rid of me. I was only 17 at the time, and my dad said, yeah, whatever. And my mum wasn't too pleased, but my dad won her over. But out there in Italy, I started reading some Christian books and looking more deeply into the Bible. And then I started thinking, no, this is what I want to do, and I want to give my life fully to it. But I never saw that as a job, as a paid thing, just doing that along with other things. So I went back, and for 4 years I did building and construction work and double glazing, fitting windows and doors and conservatory. But I was always rushing to get home. My mum and dad said they never used to see me. I used to leave at 6. Get back at 6, and then at 6:30 go back out, having had a shower and some food, to go do a Bible study or lead the church youth group or the 18 to 20s. And it was then that a minister in London pointed out to me that he thought maybe I should pack my job in and just go do it full time. It might be easier for me rather than trying to do both. So I explored that, and I've never actually looked back. I mean, I always think it's one of the greatest privileges to be able to do this work, to tell people about Jesus and teach people about Jesus and go about trying to make him known. I've not really, I don't know what else could bring so much satisfaction and joy than being able to do this this work.
Oh, well, thank you. You're one of the most, I would say, just convinced people I know about Christianity, and you think a lot too, and you like to go to the root of things. And so I'd like, there's a few questions here that I would like to ask. The whole thing about these whether it's arrogant or not, these claims. Well, even if it's not arrogant, surely the uniqueness of Jesus is quite disrespectful to other religions. How would you answer that?
The uniqueness of Jesus is
quite disrespectful to other religions, really, that claim.
Well, okay, the first thing I would say is that when I think about the word, I always like to think about words, and when I think about the word disrespectful, I don't know how the person used that word, but I always think of my children or other people, children, that they treating somebody in a manner or a way that they don't deserve, or not recognizing somebody's authority or position. And I think in a lot of ways, religions can show disrespect. Religious people can show disrespect to other people. Non-religious people can show disrespect. We saw that over in France with various things that go on, how they say what they say about religions, what different people say about non-religious people. But I guess in my mind, I always try to make a distinction between what I view as respect and celebrate. So I can respect somebody. I can respect somebody who holds different beliefs to me without having to celebrate their belief. Now, that's a distinction I would want to. And the reason I can say that is because if I respect someone who holds a different belief, that's what I call a matter of tolerance, good tolerance, and that we should live with each other. There's freedom of belief and expression. But if somebody tries to ask me, well, you should celebrate their belief as valuable as yours, well, I see that as a matter of truth, not tolerance. So, for example, it seems to me that Pete, that I'm not a huge football fan, but it does seem to me that when I was on the Wirral, and some Liverpool supporters hated the Everton supporters and vice versa. But then I'd see other people and they were friends. And what I saw is that a Liverpool supporter could have respect for his Everton friend who supported Everton, but he could never celebrate anything that he celebrated because he was fundamentally opposed to his position. But he respected him as an individual and his friend. And I think within religion, of course, we should respect the believer or the non-believer as individuals, as persons. But that doesn't mean we have to celebrate what they celebrate, because that's a matter of truth. So, for example, is Jesus, is the uniqueness of Jesus disrespectful to the religions? Well, I would say no. One of the things that would be key for me is that Jesus himself has a title called the Prince of Peace. And he encourages all his followers to live at peace with all people. Now, for me, that seems very respectful and teaches that his people should respect other people. But he's also called and says of himself that he is the truth, which distinguishes him from all of the religious leaders and distinguishes Christianity from all of the religions. He doesn't claim to be a part of the truth. He claims to be the truth. So that makes him very unique. And that uniqueness doesn't allow him to be celebrated along with other religions, or to use the religious word that you used earlier, worship. So that does set him apart as unique, because he claims to be the truth. But I don't see that as being disrespectful of other religious people outside of Christianity, but that claim of Jesus is a rejection of all of the claims outside of Christ. But you can still be respectful while not celebrating that each person's belief.
Yeah. No, I think that's very, very helpful. Thank you. Because I think that's helpful for both the Christians who are listening right now and those who are not. I think it's very, very helpful that we don't need to be embarrassed. If we're a Christian, we don't need to be embarrassed. Like, Brad wants to make God proud and so on, but we don't need to be embarrassed about that at all. But I think that's very helpful. That doesn't mean that we're dissing people because we won't celebrate what they have. That's good. And just a little ad to throw in there as well. That Prince of Peace just reminded me that, so this Sunday morning, I'll talk about this at the end as well, but we're going to look a bit more about the peace that God offers us at Christmas. So we'll hear more about peace on Sunday. But thank you. This is a question that bothers me. So this is my question, Scott. But if Jesus is so incredible, then how is he so easy to ignore for so many people? And like in Riverside especially, there's many men, although we've had quite a few men on the videos and stuff tonight, but there's many men who don't seem to want to get too close to Jesus. Why is he easy to ignore for people if he is so unique?
Okay, yeah, so if Jesus is so incredible, so unique, then how is he easy to ignore?
And specifically for blokes, maybe, if there is.
Okay, well, let me come to blokes. Let me start with the question. I wouldn't see that this is a question about Jesus, what Jesus is like. Mm-hmm. But I would say that as a statement about what people is like. Mm-hmm. So let me just change the words in the question. No, just to put a different slant on it. Okay. And let me put it like this, a bit topical. If COVID is so dangerous, then how is it so easy to ignore for so many people? Yeah. That's not a statement about COVID. That's true. That's a statement about people. Mm-hmm. That statement, it's you can't judge the reality of something based on how many people respond to it. Mm-hmm. There are situations in the history of the world where there's been a great reality out there. Let's talk about the rise of Hitler. Mm-hmm. That's ignored by the vast majority. Eventually, they had to come to terms with the fact that ignoring the reality came at the peril of many people. So it's not, the statement itself doesn't tell you anything about Jesus. It just tells you something about people and how they respond to different things. So it seems to me that if you want to judge the reality of something, and if you want to judge the reality of Jesus Christ as an historical figure, then you have to ask different questions. You don't have to say, well, do we judge his uniqueness and how marvelous or incredible he is based on how people respond to him? Well, I just don't think that's a wise or rational thing to do. In regards to why do so many men, well, I would take it back to COVID again and link it to some of the things that Brad said. Why do so many people ignore COVID? Why do people jump on the conspiracy bandwagons? Why are people quick to say, well, I don't believe this aspect of the research? Well, it all depends on how it impinges upon their lives and how it impacts their lives. So what did most football supporters say when the rules first came out? Oh, I don't believe it's spread by singing. Why? Because they wanted to be at the matches chanting their songs. So what view that religion is full of rules and makes demands? And I think most people, like in their heads, when they think about religion and when they think about Christianity, they have an idea that it'll have some impact upon their lives. And they're not willing to count the cost and to suffer that impact. Because I guess they've weighed it and don't think that the impact is worth the risk. So lots of people this Christmas, given the guidance on COVID, won't stick with it because they weigh it and decide that they'll be better off doing this, that, or the other. The easiest way to avoid the impact of anything on your life is to deny its reality. if you can deny its reality, then you don't have to even get involved with the whole idea of the impact it will have. And I just think about, although the films and fiction, but they do portray good human responses. Look at all these apocalyptic movies. What usually happens, there's always somebody who's denying it, whether it's the head of a government or an agency. There's always people trying to cover it up. And usually at the root of why they want to cover it up and try to deny its reality is because they're scared of the impact it will have upon them or their government or their country, whatever it might be. That's just the human condition. We seek to deny reality in order to minimize the impact. How do you minimize the impact of Jesus' claim upon your lives? Well, you start by just trying to deny the reality, but that doesn't tell you anything about Jesus. All it does is tell you something about the human condition.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's good. And it's interesting. I was even talking recently with, it was a guy who runs a pub, and he was just saying how people he finds it hard, people get through the door. They just want to stay in their own houses all the time. And there is we're a nation full of individuals who, we've got our lives sorted and we don't want anything to disturb our lives, do we? And we've weighed it all up and we don't want any disruption coming in. But yeah, that's what's so brilliant to see in each of those wee videos tonight as well, is that, well, Jesus does do some disruption. Of course he does, but it's very, very good disruption. So this leads us really to the last question, I guess. But so as I went through that tonight, I kept trying to point that Jesus is the answer to the different questions brought up by life. But I guess there's an impatience in us in terms of him being the answer. Is that always a waiting? Do you know, a waiting for until we die and we're with God? Do you know, the way Sheila said, at peace and with our Savior? Do we always have to wait? Or is there any way in which Jesus is the answer to these things now? I think, like, take poverty as the main example or whatever. Is there any way that Jesus is the answer to poverty now? What would you say to that?
Well, I think it's a great question, and there is no doubt about it that the emphasis that you've given and the emphasis that Sheila gave is the right one. So the claim about Jesus is that he's a king and that he reigns. Any kingdom with a king, their reign is marked by certain things. If you have a good king and a good administration, you think of our queen. Most people see her reign and the way that she is as it's been a good thing and having largely speaking a good impact upon her nation and citizens. And there'll probably be more Republicans after she
I think she's going to buy from most people, though, Scott. Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Yeah, she will, yes. And that's the thing with Jesus is, you look at what does his reign look like? Well, during his life on earth, he demonstrated what his reign looks like. He heals the sick. He raises the dead. He restores outcast people like prostitutes and lepers, the people who were kicked out of society. So you start to see that actually Jesus' reign as king and his kingdom is going to be a great kingdom. And then he promises, and you're right, it's a future thing, that in that his kingdom where he reigns supreme overall, and everything is made right, there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain and no more poverty. And that is a future aspect. But does Jesus' reign make a difference now? Well, you've just had 4 testimonies from Christians who clearly say that Jesus' reign does make a difference now. Sheila spoke about Des, and it's made a difference to Des. Yes, he's at peace, no longer suffering, whole. But it made a difference to Sheila in how she was able to mourn and how she coped with Des's death as a believer in Jesus Christ. If you go to other issues like poverty, it's really interesting. So, like, if you look at the Roman Empire, when the Roman Empire started to spread, you'd got places where the Roman Empire had really taken root, and they saw huge benefits from that. And then as the empire started to spread, the benefits came to other places that got education, and they got sanitation and all these kind of things. And the new creation, when Jesus returns as king, that's where his reign will be set and permanent and perfect. But even now, where that reign goes out, it does start to have an impact. So there are countries that have got educated out of poverty because of the influence of Christianity. The way that Europe was shaped is because of the Christian view. I remember telling you a story about you remember that guy, the Indian professor and philosopher, and he was talked about how he used to get annoyed that people used to say, "Oh, where were windmills first invented?" And he said, "You've got plans for windmills in India a long time before you had them in Europe, but in India, because their belief system is probably Hindu, they didn't need to create windmills because they had millions and millions of these lower class people who they didn't care about, and they just made them grind out the grain. And if they died, then they got another one and pulled them in, and that's it." But in Europe, because of Christianity and belief in Jesus as king and wanting his reign to be seen, the Christian monks there, as soon as they saw the plans for windmills, they said, "Look, why should these donkeys or oxes be burdened in crushing the grain if we can harness the power of the wind?" So where Jesus, as people go, living under the kingship of Jesus, they have a massive impact. A Christian pastor in Seoul in South Korea, he arrived there, and it was said when he arrived that the average man would finish his day's work, he would get his wage packet, he would go out, he would gamble 50% of it, drink 25% of it, and give 25% of his wife, who then had to try and educate, clothe, and feed the children. And then he went there, and thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people started becoming Christians. And what happened to the entire city? Well, it sat in poverty, and it was lifted out of poverty because the husband started giving 100% of the money to the wives, who then fed the children, clothed the children, and educated the children, which brought an entire generation out of poverty, purely because people were becoming Christians and living under the rule of Christ and following his ways. That had a massive impact. Because if God has created us, then he knows how life would flourish best. And therefore, if you take his manual, the Bible, you start living that, then it will have an impact now. Will poverty be eradicated in our time? No, that is something that's for the future. But can poverty be eradicated in communities and centers? Well, actually, that's throughout the history of Christianity in various places. That's exactly what we have seen.
Thank you, Scott. That is just an excellent answer and really helpful as well, because I guess as pastor of Christ Church Riverside, my prayer, my hope, and as I try to make sure God's word keeps going out to us, I want us as a church to be shaped so that we can be watched by the local community, we can be watched by the people around us, and they can see this is true, this is real, this is actually happening, that these things begin to be put right because people are living God's way. Yes, it's always a broken world, but I guess that's what my hope is, that people's friends and so on who have tuned in tonight might join us, might come and watch us as a church and see the kind of truth of what you're saying there. But Scott, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. You are a busy man, but I appreciate those answers. And in one way, it'd be great to do this for longer, but maybe we could do it again in the future. But thanks very much, and I'll let you mute yourself now. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. It's been brilliant having you, and it's been brilliant having Scott. But thank you so much to those guys who were willing to be filmed and then for that to be broadcast. I appreciate. I'm a guy who I don't mind it too much. I'm used to it, but I appreciate that the cost of that for some of you guys was quite high, but it was very, very helpful to us, and we're very grateful. Now, in the next 4 weeks on Sunday mornings, Christ Church Riverside, we're going to be streaming our services. We've been streaming them for a while, but we're putting them on YouTube every week. Hopefully we'll get to gather physically as well after lockdown. That's the plan. But every week for the next 4 weeks, those are going to go out on YouTube and probably Facebook Live as well. And so we would love to invite you, if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, or you've been on Zoom tonight, we'd love to invite you to be part of our church services for the next 4 weeks. We're doing an Advent series. We're trying to get ready for Christmas. And we're making those services a bit easier to engage with for people who are not believers or people who haven't been to church before. And so we'd love you to come along virtually anyway. Watch us, listen to us, and ask some questions. And again, let me just finish by, again, pointing to Jesus and saying that he is the answer. He's unique. He's the answer. What he says, what I say is fallible, isn't it? I'm a person. What we've all said is people is fallible. What Scott said is fallible. He's a person. But Jesus Christ, what he says stands, and it will hold you and keep you forever. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's much appreciated. And hopefully we'll get to see some of you on Sunday as well. Thank you.